air inside the Senate Judiciary Committee room did not feel procedural. It felt anticipatory, as if something beneath the surface was waiting to rupture, and no one yet knew exactly where the crack would appear. The lighting was bright, clinical, unforgiving, the kind of lighting that leaves no shadows to hide inside and no corners to retreat to once a question has been asked in plain English. FBI Director Kash Patel sat at the witness table in a Navy suit that projected composure, flanked by attorneys who had likely rehearsed every predictable line of inquiry but could not rehearse for what had not yet been spoken aloud. For the first 90 minutes, the hearing followed the well-worn choreography of Washington oversight. Questions read from prepared remarks, answers delivered in polished bureaucratic cadence, commitments made to nothing, and admissions offered to no one. Patel looked controlled, measured, occasionally glancing at his watch, as if the proceedings were an obligation to be endured rather than a reckoning to be faced. Senator John Kennedy did not interrupt that rhythm at the beginning, and that was not accidental. He waited while colleagues circled familiar terrain, staffing levels, funding priorities, January 6th, internal procedures, the kind of topics that generate sound but rarely generate consequence. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, hands folded, listening without appearing impatient, allowing the director to settle into a sense of predictability that can be more dangerous than hostility. There is a discipline to restraint in a hearing room, a patience that allows confidence to grow just enough before it is tested. Kennedy understood that comfort is often the precondition for exposure. At precisely 3:47 p.m. Eastern, when the chair recognized him, the temperature in the room did not change physically, but something in the atmosphere tightened. Kennedy leaned toward the microphone and dispensed with preamble. No pleasantries, no performative courtesy designed to soften what was coming next. He said a name that still carries the weight of scandal, corruption, and unresolved suspicion in the American public consciousness. Jeffrey Epstein. The shift was immediate and unmistakable, because Epstein is not a line item in a budget. He is a symbol of institutional failure and unanswered questions that refuse to disappear. Kennedy's first question was not theatrical, it was numerical, and numbers can be more dangerous than accusations because they are harder to dismiss. Director Patel, how many documents related to Jeffrey Epstein are currently held by the FBI? Patel did not answer with a number. He answered with a hedge, describing the volume as difficult to quantify and the material as substantial. Kennedy cut the ambiguity off at its root and made clear he was not asking for context, he was asking for a figure. The distinction mattered because essays blur responsibility while numbers assign it. Patel glanced toward his attorneys before responding that without reviewing internal databases, he could not provide an accurate count. That response might have worked in another setting, but not in a hearing about transparency concerning one of the most notorious criminal cases in recent memory. Kennedy did not raise his voice. He sharpened his clarity. You are the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you are telling this committee that you do not know roughly how many Epstein files you are sitting on. The phrase "sitting on" was deliberate, not inflammatory, but implicative, suggesting possession without release and authority without action. Kennedy then introduced context that had already been placed into the public record through a Freedom of Information Act request. Approximately 2,300 documents related to the Epstein investigation remain withheld by the FBI. He did not accuse Patel of that number. He asked whether it sounded about right. After 5 seconds of silence that felt longer than 5 seconds, Patel acknowledged that the figure was within the general range. Within the general range is Washington's language for confirmation without enthusiasm, and Kennedy treated it accordingly. Of those 2,300 documents, Kennedy asked, how many have been released to the public? Patel pivoted toward redaction protocols, privacy interests, classification standards, the protective architecture of federal agencies that often becomes a shield against accountability. Kennedy did not allow the pivot to stand. He did not ask about procedures. He asked about quantity. Approximately 90 documents have been released in redacted form, Patel said, and the arithmetic hung in the room without assistance. 90 out of 2,300 is roughly 4%. Kennedy did not need to editorialize the disparity. He allowed the percentage to exist as its own indictment of transparency. That leaves 96% of the Epstein file inventory shielded from public view. He asked the question that followed naturally and inevitably from that imbalance. What is in the other 96% that the American people are not allowed to see? Patel answered with a familiar triad: sensitive information, ongoing investigations, national security, privacy concerns. Kennedy dismantled those pillars one by one with the simplest tool available: chronology. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. The principal investigation has been closed. If the primary subjects are deceased or incarcerated, what ongoing investigation justifies the continued concealment of thousands of documents? Patel shifted slightly in his seat, no longer bored, no longer checking his watch. He spoke of ancillary matters under review, a phrase so elastic it can stretch to cover almost anything and therefore clarify almost nothing. Ancillary matters, Kennedy repeated, isolating the vagueness rather than letting it float past unchallenged. If the principal actors have already faced their legal endpoints, who exactly are these ancillary matters protecting? That question did not carry rhetorical flourish, it carried implication. And implication is what makes bureaucratic language uncomfortable. Kennedy then reached into a blue folder he had brought with him, a physical object that signaled preparation rather than improvisation. From that folder, he removed a memorandum dated February 8th, 2 months after Patel assumed the position of FBI Director. The memo stated that materials previously cleared for potential Freedom of Information Act release had been redesignated as law enforcement sensitive and removed from the release queue. Kennedy read that language slowly enough to ensure it entered both the room and the record. 47 documents, he emphasized. 47 items that had already been reviewed by career agents, Department of Justice attorneys, and classification specialists. Those documents had been cleared for release until a change in leadership intervened. After Patel became director, those same documents were buried again. Patel framed the shift as evolving methodology and updated risk assessments, the kind of explanation that sounds reasonable until it is placed against timing. Kennedy did not accuse him of inventing risk. He asked about influence. Did anyone outside the FBI ask you to reclassify those documents? Patel responded with a general statement about interagency coordination that did not address the specificity of the question. Kennedy narrowed the aperture. Did anyone from the White House communicate with you about the Epstein Files? Patel said he did not recall any specific communication. Kennedy did not allow recall to become refuge. Did anyone from Donald Trump's legal team contact you about those files? The expression on Patel's face shifted for a fraction of a second before composure returned. He insisted that his decisions regarding document classification were based solely on national security and law enforcement interests, not external pressure. It was not a yes, and it was not a no. At that point, the hearing had crossed from routine oversight into prosecutorial sequencing. Kennedy was no longer asking isolated questions. He was constructing a timeline. February 8th, memo issued. 47 documents cleared for release are redesignated as restricted. 2 months into Patel's tenure. The timing was precise, and the number was specific. Not a rumor, but an administrative action. Kennedy allowed that fact to settle before moving further. The hearing room, which had hummed earlier with procedural back and forth, was now quiet in a different way. Staffers stopped typing. Observers leaned forward. Even colleagues who had been preparing their own remarks appeared to recognize that something more consequential than standard oversight was unfolding. Kennedy did not raise his tone. He lowered it slightly, which, in a microphone, amplifies gravity rather than diminishes it. He had established the inventory, he had established the percentage, and he had established the reclassification. What remained was explanation, and explanation is what transforms chronology into accountability. Kennedy's questions were not sprawling. They were surgical, each one narrowing the space in which ambiguity could survive. He did not claim corruption, he asked for clarity. He did not declare motive, he demanded sequence. The director of the FBI now sat inside a structure of facts that had been placed carefully around him. 2,300 documents withheld, 90 released, 47 previously cleared, then buried again after a change in leadership. A memo dated February 8th, confirming redesignation. The words law enforcement sensitive, replacing the words cleared for release. None of those elements were speculative, none required inference, and none had been denied. The first phase of Kennedy's questioning did not rely on accusation. It relied on arithmetic and timing. Arithmetic does not argue, it reveals disparity. Timing does not accuse, it invites scrutiny. Patel could explain procedure, he could invoke privacy, he could refer to ancillary matters, but the numbers remained unmoved. 4% released, 96% concealed. As the first segment of questioning drew to a pause, the foundation had been laid. The director had acknowledged the general range of withheld documents. He had confirmed the limited release. He had not denied the reclassification of 47 items. He had not provided a clear external justification. The room understood that the next question would not be about quantity, but about connection. Kennedy closed this phase not with spectacle, but with insistence. Transparency is not an abstract virtue when thousands of documents connected to elite criminal activity remain hidden from public view. When reclassification occurs after clearance, the burden of explanation does not rest with the public. It rests with the agency. And when the director cannot provide that explanation without retreating into generalities, the silence that follows becomes its own statement. The hearing had shifted from oversight to examination. The groundwork was complete. The numbers were on the record. The memo was read aloud. The reclassification was acknowledged. What remained was to ask whether the sequence was coincidence or consequence, and that question had not yet been fully put. What happened next was not an escalation in volume, it was an escalation in precision. Kennedy did not pivot away from the timeline he had just constructed. He tightened it. The room had already absorbed the February 8th memo, the 47 documents redesignated, the 90 out of 2,300 released, the 96% withheld from public view. Those facts were no longer floating in abstraction. They were anchored to dates and administrative actions. And Kennedy understood that chronology is most powerful when it narrows toward a moment. He reached again into the blue folder, not theatrically, not abruptly, but with the deliberate movement of someone who had come prepared to place a sequence into the record. He held up a phone log. "This is a phone log from February 23rd, he said, time-stamped at 10:47 p.m. Eastern. A call was placed from your personal cell phone to a New York law firm, Kasowitz Benson Torres." He did not rush the name. He allowed it to register. "Do you know who that firm represents, Director Patel?" Patel's expression did not collapse, but it shifted from procedural detachment to calculation. He responded that in the course of his duties, he speaks with many attorneys. Kennedy did not dispute that general proposition. He refined it. "That firm represents Donald Trump," he said plainly. "And according to this log, you spoke with someone there for 17 minutes. Not a missed call, not a voicemail, not a 30-second courtesy exchange. 17 minutes. The number mattered because length suggests substance. 2 months into your tenure as FBI Director," Kennedy continued, "you place a 17-minute call from your personal cell phone to the law firm representing Donald Trump. And 2 days later, on February 25th, 47 Epstein documents that had previously been cleared for release are officially reclassified as restricted." He did not insert adjectives. He inserted proximity. The silence that followed was not procedural. It was evaluative. Staffers glanced at one another. Reporters lowered their eyes to their notes, then back to the witness table. Patel answered that the call concerned a separate matter. Kennedy did not allow that assertion to exist without challenge. "What separate matter?" he asked. Patel did not elaborate. He did not claim privilege. He did not clarify. He offered only the general reassurance that his classification decisions were based solely on national security and law enforcement interests. Kennedy leaned slightly forward, not aggressively, but insistently. "Did anyone connected to Donald Trump ask you to bury the Epstein Files?" It was not an elaborate question. It did not require interpretation. It required yes or no. Patel responded not with either word, but with a phrase about interagency coordination occurring on various matters. Kennedy did not let that phrase pass unexamined. "That was not my question," he said. "My question was simple." The repetition was not rhetorical flourish. It was prosecutorial discipline. "Did anyone connected to Donald Trump ask you to bury the Epstein Files?" The word bury was chosen intentionally. It did not allege destruction. It alleged concealment. Patel's jaw tightened slightly before he answered that he resented the implication that he would compromise his integrity. Kennedy did not accuse him of a crime. He reassembled the sequence. "You spoke to Trump's lawyers on February 23rd at 10:47 p.m. for 17 minutes, he said evenly. "On February 25th, 47 Epstein documents that had been cleared for release were reclassified as restricted. Those are not allegations. Those are dates. Those are durations. Those are administrative actions. Now I am asking you whether anyone connected to Donald Trump asked you to bury those files." The room was still. Patel did not say yes. He did not say no. He reiterated that his decisions were grounded in law enforcement judgment. Kennedy responded not with outrage, but with a metaphor rooted in common sense. "If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it is probably not a chicken." He did not raise his voice. He sharpened his implication. "You reclassified documents that were about to be released to the public," Kennedy continued. "You did so after speaking with the law firm representing Donald Trump. And now you ask this committee to accept that this sequence is coincidence." The question was not framed as an accusation. It was framed as a request for explanation. Patel maintained that the call was unrelated. He did not provide context that would sever the timeline Kennedy had constructed. At this point, the hearing no longer revolved around raw numbers. It revolved around alignment. February 8th memo redesignating 47 documents. February 23rd, 17-minute call to Trump's law firm. February 25th, official reclassification of those 47 documents. 3 dates, 1 pattern. Kennedy did not assert causation. He emphasized adjacency. When Patel attempted again to shield his response with generalities about integrity and process, Kennedy shifted the frame from motive to sequence. "I am not questioning your feelings about integrity," he said. "I am questioning the order of events. You can resent implication all you like. The timeline does not resent anything. It simply exists. And right now, that timeline raises questions that you have not answered." The director's attorneys, who had remained largely still, began exchanging notes. The posture at the witness table tightened. This was no longer a conversation about bureaucratic caution. It was about a 17-minute call that occurred at 10:47 p.m. on a personal device to a firm representing a former president, whose name is inseparable from the Epstein narrative in public discourse. The optics were no longer abstract. They were concrete. Kennedy asked again whether the White House had communicated about the Epstein Files. Patel said he did not recall specific communications. Kennedy narrowed further. "Did anyone from Donald Trump's legal team contact you about those files before the reclassification occurred?" Patel declined to provide a yes or no. Instead, he returned to the assertion that classification decisions were made based on national security and law enforcement interests. That refusal to deny became its own presence in the room. In a hearing environment, silence can be louder than accusation. A direct question, repeated twice, that does not receive a direct answer does not evaporate. It lingers. Kennedy did not allow it to dissipate. He turned slightly, not theatrically, but deliberately, toward the committee members and then toward the cameras. The American people deserve to understand whether the concealment of documents related to elite criminal activity was influenced by conversations with the legal representatives of a former president, he said. That is not a partisan question. That is a transparency question. Patel did not interrupt. He did not contest the framing. He remained within the boundaries of procedural defense. Kennedy then did something subtle but significant. He restated the sequence without commentary. February 8th, memo redesignating 47 documents as law enforcement sensitive. February 23rd, 17-minute call at 10:47 p.m. to Kasowitz Benson Torres. February 25th, official reclassification of those 47 documents. He did not say what the sequence meant. He allowed the committee and the public to draw their own conclusions. At this stage, the hearing had moved beyond theoretical oversight. It was no longer about how many documents exist or what percentage has been released. It was about why documents that had been cleared were subsequently withdrawn from release, and whether that decision intersected with private communication between the director and the legal representatives of a former president. Patel had not denied the call. He had not denied the reclassification. He had not denied the timeline. The refusal to deny became the focal point. Kennedy did not accuse him of lying. He did not claim knowledge of the content of the call. He simply noted that when asked whether anyone connected to Donald Trump asked him to bury the Epstein files, Patel did not say no. In a setting where witnesses routinely deny impropriety at the earliest opportunity, the absence of denial becomes conspicuous. The atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely from its earlier predictability. The procedural hum was gone. There was no checking of watches now. There was no bored posture. There was a visible recognition that a narrative had been placed into the record and that it would not be easily dismantled with generalities. Kennedy's approach was not explosive. It was incremental, which made it more difficult to deflect. By the time this segment of questioning concluded, several facts were no longer in dispute. The FBI holds approximately 2,300 Epstein-related documents. Roughly 90 have been released in redacted form. 47 documents previously cleared for release were redesignated as restricted on February 8th. A 17-minute call occurred on February 23rd at 10:47 p.m. from Patel's personal cell phone to the law firm representing Donald Trump. 2 days later, those 47 documents were officially reclassified. Kennedy did not declare guilt. He did not allege conspiracy. He placed proximity into the public record and demanded explanation. Patel did not provide a denial that severed the sequence. And in a hearing room where every word is weighed and every refusal is noted, that absence became louder than any statement of defense. The next question would not be about whether documents were buried. It would be about what those documents contained and whether their contents implicated powerful individuals. The ground had been prepared. The timeline had been set. The silence had been heard. Once the sequence had been locked into the record, Kennedy shifted the focus from timing to substance. The room already understood that 47 documents had been cleared, then buried. The room already understood that a 17-minute call to Trump's law firm sat between clearance and reclassification. What remained was the question that had been hovering from the moment Epstein's name was spoken aloud. What exactly is inside the 96% that remains hidden? Kennedy did not phrase it as curiosity. He phrased it as duty. Director Patel, are there documents within the Epstein Files that directly implicate Donald Trump in criminal activity? He did not embellish the question with adjectives. He did not layer it with commentary. He did not accuse. He asked about existence. The difference mattered because existence is a binary matter. Either such documents exist, or they do not. Patel did not answer with a denial. He responded that he could not comment on classified materials in an open setting. Kennedy did not ask him to disclose content. He clarified immediately. "I am not asking you to describe the documents," he said. "I am asking whether such documents exist. Yes or no?" That narrowing removed the shield of classification as a justification for silence. The director's posture stiffened. The attorneys beside him shifted again, their pens moving faster across paper. Patel repeated that he could not comment on classified material. Kennedy did not accept that as responsive. "I am not asking for classified details," he said again. "I am asking whether evidence exists within the Epstein Files that connects Donald Trump to criminal conduct. That is not a request for disclosure. That is a request for acknowledgement." There are moments in hearings when a witness chooses between denial and deflection. Denial is risky because it can be disproven. Deflection is safer but louder in implication. Patel chose deflection. He declined to answer the question as framed. Kennedy let the silence expand. It was not a hostile silence. It was evaluative. It was the kind of silence that allows every observer in the room to reach the same conclusion without being instructed to do so. The director of the FBI had been asked whether documents exist implicating Donald Trump in criminal activity connected to Jeffrey Epstein. He had been given the opportunity to say no. He had not said no. Kennedy did not dramatize that reality. He articulated it calmly. "You could have denied the existence of such documents," he said. "You did not." That sentence altered the gravity of the hearing. The earlier portion had been about process, about reclassification, about proximity. This was about content. Not what was written in the documents, but whether they contain information that touches a former president. Kennedy did not claim that they do. He highlighted that the director refused to deny that they do. The committee members to Kennedy's left and right were no longer shuffling papers. They were listening. Reporters in the back of the room were no longer glancing at phones. They were writing. The moment had shifted from bureaucratic oversight to potential historical consequence, because the refusal to deny existence under oath carries weight that rhetoric cannot dilute. Kennedy then did what prosecutors do when they sense evasion. He reframed the question in narrower language. Are there documents in the Epstein Files that reference Donald Trump in connection with alleged criminal acts? Patel declined again to answer directly. He insisted that classification constraints prevented him from responding in open session. Kennedy did not let the framing drift. "This is not a request for operational detail," he said. "It is a request for acknowledgement of existence. If the answer is no, you may say no. If the answer is yes, you may say that you cannot elaborate. But you have not said no." The distinction was surgical. It left Patel with the clearest possible path to denial if denial were available. Patel did not take that path. He returned to general language about protecting sensitive information. Kennedy leaned back slightly, allowing the refusal to sit in the room. Then he leaned forward again and placed the implication into the record without editorial flourish. The director of the FBI has declined to deny that documents exist connecting Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal activities. That is not my interpretation. That is what just occurred. The prosecutorial tone did not intensify in volume. It intensified in structure. Kennedy assembled the timeline once more, but this time he attached it to substance. 47 documents cleared for release were redesignated as restricted on February 8th. On February 23rd, at 10:47 p.m., a 17-minute call was placed from Director Patel's personal cell phone to the law firm representing Donald Trump. On February 25th, those 47 documents were officially reclassified. And when asked whether documents exist implicating Donald Trump, the director declined to deny their existence. Kennedy did not accuse Patel of conspiring with anyone. He did not allege instruction from the White House. He did not assert knowledge of the call's content. He presented adjacency. He presented refusal. He presented sequence. And he allowed the structure of those facts to stand without embellishment. There is a difference between accusation and exposure. Accusation asserts what cannot yet be proven. Exposure arranges facts in an order that invites conclusion. Kennedy chose exposure. He did not need to speculate about what was discussed during the 17-minute call. He did not need to assert motive behind the reclassification. He needed only to show that the director refused to deny the existence of potentially incriminating documents after that sequence of events. The room's atmosphere had shifted entirely from the first 90 minutes of predictable oversight. The earlier boredom had evaporated. The director was no longer glancing at his watch. He was listening carefully to every word, aware that each refusal would be transcribed and replayed. Kennedy's tone remained steady, which made the gravity sharper rather than softer. "Let us be clear," Kennedy said, his voice measured. "If no such documents exist, you can state that plainly. If they do exist, you can state that you cannot discuss them. What you cannot do is avoid the question entirely." Patel did not supply the missing denial. He repeated that he could not comment in open session. That repetition in context no longer sounded procedural. It sounded protective. Kennedy did not say that explicitly. He allowed the repetition to define itself. In hearings, repetition can either reinforce clarity or amplify evasion. Here it amplified evasion. Kennedy then turned slightly toward the cameras again, not as performance, but as acknowledgement that the audience extended beyond the committee. The American people have heard the director decline to deny the existence of documents implicating a former president in criminal conduct tied to Jeffrey Epstein. That is not a partisan claim. That is what just transpired under oath. Patel's defense remained anchored in classification boundaries. He did not challenge the accuracy of the timeline. He did not contest the existence of the phone call. He did not deny the reclassification, and he did not deny the possible existence of incriminating documents. Each of those omissions compounded the structural weight of Kennedy's sequence. At this stage, the narrative had become self-contained. The withheld documents, the reclassification, the phone call, the refusal to deny. No single element proved wrongdoing, but together they formed a pattern that demanded explanation beyond generalities about process. Kennedy did not state that pattern as conspiracy. He stated it as chronology. When the questioning paused, the record contained a clear chain. Approximately 2,300 Epstein documents remain withheld. Roughly 90 have been released. 47 previously cleared documents were redesignated as restricted on February 8th. A 17-minute call occurred on February 23rd at 10:47 p.m. to Trump's law firm. 2 days later, those 47 documents were officially reclassified. And when asked whether documents exist implicating Donald Trump, the director refused to deny their existence. Kennedy had not raised his voice. He had not accused anyone of a crime. He had not invented facts. He had arranged them, and in arranging them, he had placed the burden of explanation squarely on the director of the FBI. The next phase would not introduce new information. It would solidify what had already been established and confront the meaning of silence under oath. By the time Kennedy reached the final phase of his questioning, the facts were no longer scattered data points. They were aligned in a sequence that required either a clean denial or a compelling explanation. Neither had been provided. The committee room was no longer operating in the rhythm of routine oversight. It had entered the cadence of consequence. Every word now carried weight beyond the chamber. Kennedy did not escalate emotionally. He escalated structurally. He restated the chain one more time, slowly, deliberately, as if building a closing argument. Approximately 2,300 Epstein-related documents remain in FBI custody. Roughly 90 have been released. 47 documents, previously cleared for public release, were redesignated as restricted on February 8th, 2 months into Director Patel's tenure. On February 23rd, at 10:47 p.m., a 17-minute call was placed from Patel's personal cell phone to Kasowitz Benson Torres, the law firm representing Donald Trump. On February 25th, those 47 documents were officially reclassified. He paused not for effect, but for clarity. When asked whether anyone connected to Donald Trump asked you to bury those files, you did not say no. When asked whether documents exist implicating Donald Trump in criminal conduct connected to Jeffrey Epstein, you did not say no. That is the record as it stands. The weight of that phrasing did not come from tone. It came from repetition of refusal. In hearings, silence is rarely neutral. Silence under oath is almost never neutral. Kennedy did not accuse Patel of lying. He did not allege coordination beyond what had been placed on the record. He focused on what had not been said. In a legal setting, the opportunity to deny is often more powerful than the denial itself. Patel had been given that opportunity twice. Kennedy leaned back slightly, his posture controlled. Then forward again, reinforcing that the burden was not on him to prove motive, but on the director to clarify sequence. Director Patel, this committee is not speculating. We are looking at a documented timeline. You have acknowledged the general volume of withheld files. You have acknowledged the limited release. You have not disputed the February 8th memo. You have not denied the February 23rd call. You have not denied the February 25th reclassification. and you have declined to deny the existence of documents implicating a former president. The director's response remained anchored to procedural language. He reiterated that classification decisions were made based on national security and law enforcement interests. Kennedy did not challenge the authority to classify. He challenged the coincidence of timing. Authority explains the power to act. It does not explain why action occurred immediately after contact with a law firm representing a subject whose name is inseparable from the underlying scandal. There is a difference between lawful authority and lawful judgment. Kennedy did not suggest Patel lacked authority. He suggested the judgment required explanation. When 47 documents are cleared and then buried, the public is entitled to understand why. When that burial occurs within 48 hours of a 17-minute call to Trump's attorneys, the explanation cannot consist solely of procedural abstraction. The prosecutorial tone sharpened not in anger, but in inevitability. Director Patel, if this were an ordinary criminal case, and an investigator spoke privately with a suspect's attorney 2 days before altering evidence classification, that investigator would be asked to explain the sequence, not because contact with counsel is illegal, but because proximity demands transparency. That is not hostility. That is oversight. Patel did not dispute the timeline. He did not contest the duration of the call. He did not offer a separate chronology that would sever adjacency. The record remained intact. Kennedy emphasized again that he was not alleging destruction of evidence. He was addressing concealment from public release. Words matter. Bury does not mean shred. It means withhold. The hearing had reached a point where the refusal to deny had become the central fact. Kennedy made that explicit. The director of the FBI has chosen not to deny the existence of documents implicating Donald Trump in criminal conduct related to Jeffrey Epstein. That is not commentary. That is what occurred in this room. In political hearings, denial is often immediate, emphatic, and rehearsed. Here, denial was absent. Kennedy did not pretend that absence equaled guilt. He did not cross that line. Instead, he returned to the principle of accountability. The American people were told that transparency would guide this administration's handling of the Epstein Files. Transparency is not measured by 90 redacted documents out of 2,300. Transparency is not measured by redesignating previously cleared material as restricted. Transparency is not measured by declining to deny the existence of incriminating evidence. The final exchange did not involve shouting. It involved inevitability. Director Patel, you can correct the record right now if the implication is false. You can state clearly that no documents exist implicating Donald Trump. You have chosen not to do so. The absence of denial now speaks for itself. Patel maintained that classification constraints prevented him from responding further. In the final minutes, Kennedy stepped back from individual questions and framed the broader consequence. When powerful individuals appear in investigative files connected to elite criminal activity, the public's trust hinges on equal treatment under law. If documents were reclassified for legitimate reasons, explain those reasons. If the timing of that reclassification was coincidence, articulate the coincidence. If incriminating documents do not exist, deny their existence. What cannot survive scrutiny is silence. The room did not erupt. There was no dramatic gavel strike. There was a stillness that felt heavier than noise. The earlier procedural rhythm had been replaced by a structured narrative that would now travel beyond the chamber. The record contained the numbers. The record contained the memo. The record contained the call log. The record contained the refusal to deny. Kennedy closed without theatrics. I am not here to accuse, he said. I am here to establish sequence. Sequence is how investigations are built. Sequence is how juries are persuaded. Sequence is how accountability is measured. Right now, the sequence before us raises questions that have not been answered. The impact did not depend on immediate reaction. It depended on permanence. The timeline was entered into congressional record. The 17-minute call at 10:47 p.m. was entered into congressional record. The 47 reclassified documents were entered into congressional record. The refusal to deny the existence of incriminating material was entered into congressional record. When the hearing adjourned, the facts remained unchanged. Approximately 2,300 Epstein-related documents remain withheld. Roughly 90 have been released. 47 previously cleared documents were redesignated as restricted on February 8th. On February 23rd, a 17-minute call was placed from the FBI Director's personal cell phone to the law firm representing Donald Trump. On February 25th, those 47 documents were officially reclassified. When asked whether anyone connected to Donald Trump asked him to bury those files, the director did not say no. When asked whether documents exist implicating Donald Trump in criminal conduct, the director did not say no. In politics, denials are currency. They are issued quickly when available. Silence, by contrast, is costly. Silence invites inference. Silence forces the public to weigh proximity and decide whether coincidence is plausible. Kennedy did not demand a verdict. He demanded clarity. Clarity was not provided. And in a hearing room where every word is transcribed and every pause is remembered, the loudest moment was not a statement. It was the absence of one.